You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Well, welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast listeners. I'm your co-host, Kristen Civiletto, and with me is Julia Rose. And we are thrilled. We've got you all over the world. Let me see, 102 countries, all 50 states, and 2,200 plus cities. We've got loyal listeners. We just are so grateful for you. We know why you are tuning in because we are bringing you the very best authors out there. And today is no exception. We are thrilled to have best-selling author Jessie Rosen. Welcome, Jessie.
Oh, thank you so much. Hello, listeners around the world. This book kind of goes around the world. So I'm so curious if there'll be listeners that are in some of the places that my heroine travels to.
Oh, I can guarantee it. In fact, I'm going to show a picture of your beautiful cover. We're here to
Oh,
talk
thank
about
you
all
so
the signs.
much.
We are so
Yeah, it's
excited.
so beautiful. And it was the very first image that the publisher sent. So there was they nailed it, I felt, on the first try.
Yeah, it transports you, this cover, just as your book does. And I can't wait to talk about it. I know Julia wanted to do a little bit of a background. But first, I want
Great.
to tell our listeners a little bit about you because you have such a fascinating career trajectory, and many people know you from different facets of your career. So, if you don't mind, I want to tell just a little bit. Now, you
Oh,
are
thank you.
absolutely. You were born on the East Coast, but you are based on the West Coast. You are a writer, producer, educator, and speaker. And we see all of that experience coming to life in your books. I think that's one of the reasons why they're so immersive and enjoyable. So
Thank you.
that's pretty cool. Now, I want to tell our listeners you've had some things where they might have already connected with you because you had a very popular blog called 20 Nothings. It was a Time Top 25 blog, Forbes Top 100, and Top 10 website for millennials, which is pretty cool. You released a novel in 2015 called Dead Ringer. It was a YA thriller. And then you went back into the Hollywood world. It sounds like. Can you tell us real briefly about some of the shows and activities, the things you did there?
Yeah, so here in Los Angeles, I was developing original concepts for television. So, in the development angle of the business, selling original ideas, hoping that they would end up on the screen, really working on that ladder. And then through that and my experience as a staff writer, I ended up show running, which means being the head writer on a series and following that series through its production for a show that you can currently watch on Amazon called The Baxters. I always pitch it as very much like a seventh heaven for the modern age. And of course, it's based on an amazing book series. So The Baxters is based on the book series The Baxters by Karen Kingsbury, and we kind of took that and reimagined it. So, that was all right before the pandemic hit. I was working on that show and we were preparing for another season to go into production when the pandemic hit. So it was really this interesting set of occurrences that gave me the time to finally sit down and write my second novel or to step into a whole real new world in writing for adults and writing in a different genre with the Heirloom, which came out last year.
I know, and we're thrilled that it did. And by the way, we've read Karen Kingsbury's books. We're familiar with the Baxter family,
Sure,
so
sure.
that's pretty cool. And we're excited for a lot of the work you've done. Is just fascinating. One of the
Thank
other
you.
things that you did is you hosted a live storytelling series called Sunday Night Sex Talks. And for people who watch The Bachelorette, and that's probably a whole lot of people on ABC, your show was featured as one of their date nights, and I think it was one of their highest rated episodes of the
It
season.
It was. So for people who are familiar, that was JoJo's season, and she was as delightful in person as she was on the show. And my storytelling show is about just women sharing fun and intimate stories of their lives, but we turned the tables for the episode and we made the guys who are vying for JoJo's love tell their own stories about love and intimacy and dating and all that. And yeah, it ended up being this big kind of bombastic scene between Chad, who was like a bad guy, and some of the other guys. So I'm being there live, which is wild to see it from behind the scenes. It was such a fun moment.
That is so
You've
cool.
That is, you've had a lot of behind the scenes aspects to your career, which is really neat. We
Yeah,
can't wait to see
yeah.
those future books.
Oh my goodness. Good idea.
Now you live in LA, as we mentioned, with your husband, and I love this. Your perfect dog, Louie,
Yes, that's right.
which you can go to
He's
your website
perfect.
and check him out. But again, we're here to talk about all the signs and
Hey,
with this gorgeous cover. And I know Julia wanted to tell us just a little bit about the book.
I
thank
will.
you.
Just some background, and I won't give anything away, any spoilers. And if you have anything that you want to add at the end, please do. So here we meet Leah Lockhart, a proudly science-minded doctor who rejects the spiritual, mystical, hippie side of life. And she's carefully curated her life to reflect these values and make her dad proud and fit in with her community. But her life is suddenly knocked off course, first by a mysterious and destabilizing case of vertigo, but then by an astrology reading that claims that she's living way out of alignment with what was written in her stars. She sets out on a path to figure out what this means for her and her future. Does that sum it up? Do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, yes. I mean, the only thing I'll add is that because she's so science-minded and I would say so stubborn, she wants to handle this mathematically. So she is certain that if she can find people in the world with her exact same astrology, and I call them star twins, then she'll see that there's no comparison. And obviously, astrology is bogus. So she goes about this in a very methodical way, and that star twin search becomes the engine for us doing a little globe trotting, which is what I love to do personally and also in my books.
I
That's
love that. I
awesome.
wasn't sure you'd want to go into that, so I'm glad you
That
brought
I
it
feel
up.
like because it's so, when I was doing research for this book, the idea of these star twins, again, which is just a terminology I'm using, was something that kind of wasn't explored that much. And so it became something that was really exciting for me to use as a way to give my character this like natural course of how am I going to actually disprove astrology? And that's her approach.
That's pretty cool. I know three people who share a birthday with me, and we've always felt a bond. And so
Ah,
over the years, I had an aunt, a neighbor. We always see each other and we
Your
say,
son?
"Oh gosh, you're
oh,
right.
also
My
you have a
son."
child.
Oops. We might have to edit that out because I forgot that one. Thank you. But there's
I love it.
there's just that little special bond, and I love that this was something that caught and captured the interest of your protagonist here.
Yes, absolutely.
So, speaking of families and family bonds, Leah seems to have a lot of similarities with her mother. And whether that's through some of her learned habits or genetics or possibly even fate. And throughout the book, she kind of starts off rejecting those similarities. She doesn't really want to have them. So, and like I said, I don't want to spoil anything, but things change and her perception changes. And I'm curious, can an apple ever fall that far from a tree? And are we in some ways born into who we are going to be?
Yeah, it's that classic question of nurture versus nature. I'm one of four girls in my family. And so I have this really interesting perspective because I've kind of watched the different ways that we came into this world, who we were as littles and who we grew up to be, and the thread of that. But then how much of each of our parents are in each one of us, but in different ways. It's so interesting to look at how that happens. I see elements of my dad and me in a stronger way than it has showed up at some of my sisters. But at the same time, there are tons of ways in which I would say I'm the most like my mom. So I just think that, and I really wanted to play with that web of who we are coming in that cannot be altered. And you hear from every parent out there that says, she came in this way, right? Like I knew that baby from go, and she had this spirit, which was different than if there's multiple children, my other child, right? But how much of that then do we really need to take a look at and make sure we're examining ourselves outside of those influences? How do you do that? What does that look like? And I think honestly, how painful can it be when you come from a loving family? When you want to be like your parents, when you aspire to have those connections and those bonds, what happens if, and this is a piece of my personal story that's in the book, what happens if you look up and say, oh no, I'm not sure I want to live where the rest of my family lives. I'm not sure I want to pursue the career paths that the rest of my family has, even though I have loved those elements of them my whole life. Like, oh no, that was really the sense that I had when I was starting to uncover that for myself. Like, oh no, it felt like a problem as opposed to feeling like this uncovering of self. So I was really eager to explore that. And I hope that Leah serves as an interesting example of the challenges, but then the beauty that can come in the relationships with, in this case, your parents, when you're willing to really look at yourself. And that's kind of where she ends up.
Absolutely. I really actually liked that she was an only child because I felt like she was free of that influence and really had to face other adults, other like established adults growing up. So,
Yeah, that's so lovely to hear. And I really wrestled with that choice. I can't relate to being an only child. I have many siblings. I'm also the oldest. So that comes into play, right? You get it. In terms of birth order, it really, all of those things influence, but the gravity of Leah's decisions, I wanted them to feel heavy for her because of the impact of being the only child to both of her parents. And from the dramatics of the story that I was telling, it felt like that was the way to get at the deepest wrestling and also kind of the deepest transformation for her.
and it seems like she was pulled from both coasts too, which kind of sounds like your own
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. So, gosh, I don't know if this was the right way to go because it was obviously very heart-wrenching for me, but I used my own birth astrology for this book. And I did that
That's awesome.
because I had a little familiarity with my self. I had a little familiarity also with my astrology. And I thought, if I am going to get to the depth of this character, I am best apt to do that by using my makeup. Of course, that led to so much more research about myself and really having to be very careful because I, of course, wanted this to be fictional. And I didn't have Leah's upbringing. I was essentially writing a very opposite story to my own. So, yeah, managing that was really interesting. But some of the core feelings of having been born one place, having come to another place, questioning whether you go back to that place, I felt like they were infused in Leah. And I do think it now seems like such a brave choice. It felt at the time like a convenient writing choice. Like I can know this character better, but I think I really stepped in something that pushed me as a person as much as it was kind of pushing my character along.
I would agree. I think it was bold, but also it now that I know that lends such a different light, like a deeper layer on your book, which is awesome. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh yeah, thank you.
We're talking about all these thought-provoking questions that are raised in your book, but I have to say it was also wildly entertaining. It's just
Oh
one of those books you
good.
could settle in and enjoy it, and it's fantastic. I think it's going to do
That
really
is the
well.
goal. That is the goal.
Well, I wanted to ask you about something. There was a line that stuck out to me, and Leah was basically saying that she was defending her life while she waited to
Mm,
get it back. And I was like, oh, that hit me. She was clearly going through a lot. She had a medical issue, a legal issue. She had people return to her life that maybe had fell out of her life for a little bit. But was she really defending and waiting for a life that no longer existed? Because I don't know that you can
yeah.
ever go back after these things.
I don't think so either. I don't think Leah is ready for that reality. We start with a character who is so certain. She's comfortable, she's certain. She's arrived at a place in her life, and I think it's okay to say a little reveal. She's just about to and has really taken over a family medical practice. So she has achieved and risen to this place that has been in her mind as the pinnacle for so long. Pieces are missing, but she'll figure them out, right? She's even certain about that. The timing had to be just right. So when she is tracked off course, the idea of everything now being unknown is untenable to her. And I think it's also right. She's my STEM heroine. So she's got that science mind, getting back to certainty. I had the pieces in place. The puzzle was complete. I just have to put it back together. But you're right. You can, I don't think, ever go back. Every day we're becoming all these different versions of ourselves, meeting people, learning things, thinking things, having aha moments. And I think that's very, very scary for Leah. So it's just not something she is willing to acknowledge. But I knew all along she was never going back.
Interesting. Yeah, because sometimes we fight so hard to retain what
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
relationship, a place we lived, a feeling.
Yeah.
And so I loved exploring that with her throughout the story because, we come to accept at some point that there's a new normal in our lives. But
Yeah.
that happens all the time. And when you're younger and you're just embarking on a new career, maybe it's not as evident that it happens all the time. That's what happens in life. And
Yeah, well,
right?
it's so interesting you say that about age, because one of the questions I had about this character was what age should she be?
Yeah.
And you hit it on the head in terms of when you're very young, you're exploring where you should go to school. In Leah's case, she goes to medical school. So placement is changing her life. Those experiences are changing her life. And so now in her 30s, she's arrived at the idea where the unknown is scarier than ever. I have found in my own experience that the older I get, the more afraid I am of the unknown, because the more you know life and how comfortable it can be and what works for you and all the rituals that are making your life run like a clock, or so you think, the scarier it is to step into the unknown. I had so much compassion for Leah in those moments. I felt guilty putting her through some of this because the unknown is really scary. And I happen to be a risk taker in life. I kind of err toward the unknown. I really like that. But I have a lot of compassion for people that don't. And I really wanted to give voice to that and to say, kind of, this makes sense.
Yeah.
This makes total sense. And it's okay. It's going to be okay.
Well, I love to, and again, I'm not going to give anything away. She had parents who were the extreme ends of that slippery slope. And,
Yes.
and that was pretty cool. So that's all I'm going to say.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly right.
There is a like pop psychology phrase that kept coming back to me as I was reading, that describes like the concept of intellectualizing your feelings instead of feeling them. And for our listeners, it's just the act of trying to figure out how or why you feel a certain way instead of just letting those things kind of move through you. And throughout the book, Leah really tries to figure everything out. She wants to disprove astrology. She wants to figure out her vertigo. She wants to figure out why her parents are the way they are and why she is the way that she is. And she even notes that a person that she meets was making her feel things that she couldn't define, and it seemed to frustrate her. So, would you say, or could you elaborate on if this is something that she does to cope with things outside of her control? And do we all do that in different ways?
Well, I'll mea culpa this first and say this is one of the areas where Leah and I are the same. I I don't love a feeling, I don't I don't love a tricky feeling, which is funny, right? As a writer, I'm like rely on feelings to infuse them in the work, but I like to intellectualize things. I like to be able to think my way to an answer and to understand my feelings in that way. It's very much my process. I think the truth of the matter is that that's a coping mechanism. I think it's a little bit of a without giving anything too much away about her upbringing, I think that that is something that can be learned. I'm sure it can also be part of temperament, but I think in my own experience as an oldest child, I was kind of a more dramatic child, prone to tears earlier in my life, and in with all the love intended behind it, encouraged to get it together, right? Encouraged to, it's okay, be brave. So those are well-meaning ideas, but they are pulling you away from your feelings, right? And I do think that a piece of what Leah is experiencing is an outgrowth of what she needed to do as a little girl, as a way to feel safe and as a way to get by and as a way to continue being a good girl, right? That feels like such an important phrase. I can imagine her really wanting that title as a little person. And so I think she's out of practice. I think feeling our feelings is something that takes a lot of practice, and the patience of sitting there and saying, I feel deeply uncomfortable. This is horrible. And I'm just going to let it happen, right? I'm going to see what it does to my body. I'm going to feel the heart palpitations or whatever comes. And to sit in that, I think that takes a level of patience that takes practice and also takes a lot of encouragement. So I am hoping that this book has gone on. She's living in her future life now that the end has turned. And I think she's really working hard on this because I think she realizes how important it is and what it's taught her. And I'll also reveal that there are some pieces of her astrology that suggest that this is a struggle of hers and will be a struggle of hers. So that was kind of cool to discover, both to use for the character and also discover about myself. It gave me a lot of like a calming sense. Oh, this makes sense. This is part of my astrology. Whether or not you believe in astrology or not, it gave me some comfort.
I could
What?
totally see that, especially when you're are prone to intellectualizing and something validates you, and you're like, you know what? I don't have to even figure it out because something already said that that's it.
Totally. Oh, and of course, right? Leah wants answers and she wants kind of like, validation for sure, but also kind of, I think everything she does is erring towards certainty. And she would say that that's logical, but I actually think that certainty is something that she needs emotionally. So I
So good.
still think her emotions are driving the show. I just think she's looking at them in a very different way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to pick up on something you had just said a minute ago about this idea of this. I want to be a good girl because
Yeah.
the relationship between Leah and her father was very complicated. It was very moving. And
Oh,
I
good.
wanted to ask you about that because he had certain expectations for her. And I wanted you to see if you would address the idea of the weight of parental expectations on children, whether they're small
Yeah.
or adult. And that was a
Yeah.
big factor here.
It was, and it was the hardest piece, one of the hardest pieces of the book to write because I have so much respect for parents, for my parents, for Leah's father, as I was crafting this individual. And it's so interesting. I should say quickly on the side, in this book, different than my first novel, all the side characters are very much inspired by real people. They're kind of like little amalgamations of real people. All the primary characters, dad and mom especially, are not. They're not my parents. I was offered a different level of support and encouragement than Leah. And so, in writing a character that was opposite me, I had to craft these parents that were very opposite mine. And in doing so, I really had to imagine and put myself in the shoes of what is this parent's goal? He wants his daughter safe. He wants his daughter happy. He wants his daughter loved. And I think also he wants her to live a life that he can understand and relate to for the purpose of their relationship, right? All those things are so beautiful. And how else, right? I think that not all parents have degrees in child psychology so that they can understand eek. If I say this, then it has this impact. Eek, if I do this, then it has this impact. I imagine that many parents are loving their children in the way that they have been loved and trying to set them up for a life that they know and makes sense. So I don't think in this story, at least, there's any malintent, but I think the weight is really heavy. It's
Oh,
really
yeah.
heavy. And I had to kind of put some, I don't want to call them passive aggressive, but I had to put some words in the mouth of Leah's father that showed the heaviness and then point to some things in the past that had weighed on her and had influenced her. Whether they were malicious or not, they were big things to say and they were bold things to say. And of course, they would influence her. So I
Yeah.
do think that I would point to some moments where this father might have thought differently about the way his words were impacting his daughter. And I think that must be such a hard thing to wrestle with as a parent. And I also want to say that Leah becomes a big girl, she becomes an adult, and she works her way out of that and through that, right? So there is, I hope that this is a hopeful read for people that do feel very bound up inside families with a lot of obligation and a lot of fear of disappointment. I hope that this helps show the steps and that there could be pain, but a lot of promise on the other side.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's actually quite inspiring on many
Oh,
levels,
good.
for sure. And, I kept thinking too that a lot of parents, and I'm speaking as a parent of four, a lot of times you feel like you are, shamed or famed by your kids, and you can't think like that, right? They're their own
Yeah.
individual person. They don't reflect on you in that sense, your worth. And
Yeah.
that's something you have to almost affirmatively decide as a parent.
Yeah. And I can't imagine, I'm not a parent, right? So I can't imagine how hard that would be. And I think that's why I have so much heart. I think that's why the father character was one of the hardest. The mother was very hard for me to write as well. But I just have so much heart for what he was doing, who he was, what he was going through, the resources he had. Um, there's a scene that happens in the book without giving anything away, and I couldn't write it, couldn't write it, couldn't write it. I couldn't even touch it. I couldn't picture the two of them in this place where this conversation needed to happen because I had so much heart for what it would feel like to be inside that moment for the two of them. And it ended up being, it needed an edit. No surprise there. And it ended up being the last thing that I wrote because it really broke my heart.
Interesting. Well, I want to kind of go to the other end of something that you had said too. You had a lot of empathy and compassion for this father. And we can see why. He loves his daughter, he knows his daughter. And listen, parents do see the aptitudes of their children. So maybe their, opinions should be given some
Hmm.
weight more than the person on the street or peers.
Yeah.
So you really wrestle with that throughout the book with Leah because she respects him as well. And she has to come to terms with that too. What is the role of a parent in her life as an adult?
Yes. And the role of her other parent too. I
Yes.
feel like that's a big piece of mystery in the book. Yeah, and that was tricky too, right? Allowing for her to move through the relationship with her mother and to ultimately, I think at first painfully, and then kind of transformatively really start to see herself in her mother.
Yeah.
And that, I even have had some experiences of that, on my own. And it's as a person who's very sure of herself, and I think that there's pieces of me in that too. It is wild to kind of awaken to different parts of yourself and to then understand your parent or family member in a different way.
Yeah.
You know,
That's very interesting.
that reminds me, I love what you said a few minutes ago about a parent wanting somebody to fit into their idea of things, whether that's a profession or taking on a family business, solely so that they can continue to understand like their child and continue that relationship. Because I feel like kids go through the understanding their parents process before parents go through the understanding their grown child process.
Oh, that's so
Like
That
interesting.
is.
that's just from my perspective because we're growing up and we're like, why are our parents
Yeah.
like this? And why am I
Yeah.
like this? And then we have to hit 30s. I'm not 30 yet, but we have to hit our
Yeah.
30s then later on and really assert this is who I am and you have to also come around because I did.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And I also wonder how much an individual's personality plays into that readiness, right? Because in my interviewing people for the book, and I interviewed some of my own star twins. So I
that's
met and found
awesome.
people with my exact same astrology so I could kind of get more perspective on this. It was really interesting how many of us, and this conversation that you mentioned, Julia, did come up in terms of many of my star twins had forged lives very different from their upbringings, very different from their parents. It was very fascinating to me. And there was an interesting divide between who felt strong in those decisions, like you're saying, kind of like, I know myself, why can't you see me? And people who kind of needed to catch up to that. And I mean, I'm just going to have to write another book about this because it keeps fascinating me.
Please
I
do.
remain really fascinated by, how much of that, where does that come from? I still am so curious about like, how did what exactly, where were the moments in trying to capture that for Leah? I think you're really right though about the fact that, and I don't know, we have a mom on this podcast. So I am curious about that idea of, are there ages where perhaps an adult parent feels like you're 18, you don't know yourself, you think you do, I'm watching you think you do, and you don't, so I imagine there's such an interesting balance between those two things, between like a strong-willed certain child and a very wise parent who has moved through those life stages. I'm so curious about the intermix between that.
Yeah. Okay, we
Oh,
need another book and another show to
I
discuss all
know.
of this.
Another
I
episode.
know.
Another episode because
I know.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no. I was going to say I would add one thing to that conversation, and that is I've learned so much about myself through the eyes of my children,
Oh,
and
that's
they're
so
all young
beautiful.
adults now, and one has followed in my footsteps professionally, but forging her own path through that.
Yeah.
And, but it's helped me reflect about why I am like I am. And,
Yeah.
you have to face some ugly truths sometimes, but who's better to point those out than your kids? In many respects.
It's so beautiful that you should say that. And my mom has said a very similar thing. Yeah. My mom has said, my children are my best teachers. My children are my biggest teachers. I feel like she said it both ways. And that's so beautiful. Oh my God, to have, had this relationship. And then for the relationship, I don't think the tables turn. I just think the world expands.
They grow.
Right. I am always going to be learning from my parents, but I think it's really interesting when that expansion happens that things are starting to go on. And I think that is a big piece of what happens for Leah and her parents, figuring out where to leave them in this story, how far Leah should go felt like something I knew. How far should the parents go in their growth? This not being their story entirely was a really big question, and I write stories of transformation and self-discovery, and I'm always really careful about the fact that how much can you really change in 3 months, 4 months, over the course of this book. And I want to paint realistic examples of change moments and change paths for people. So I do think that often requires me to leave people with work still to be done. I don't think it's realistic to offer that wrapped up, tied up bow fairy tale. It's all going to be okay. So those were choices I kind of had to make for the parents as well.
Even as far as change goes, sometimes it's the acknowledgement and like the awareness that makes all the difference in the world, where you're like, thank God you see what I'm talking about. You see, you
Totally.
understand, like you don't have to do much. You're an old retired man, but like
Yeah.
you see me, So
Yeah.
I think that came across really
Yeah.
beautifully.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a really huge step. We're talking about generations that are very different. We're talking about people in Leah's parents, especially, that were raised in a very different time. And that factors in to the story of their relationship and their upbringing. And I have a lot of heart for that. What went on in their homes, the way they were talked about emotions, about self-discovery, all those things, they really play a part in this.
That's pretty awesome. Well, I want to show our listeners this cover one more time because it is
Oh,
truly beautiful for all the signs by Jessie Rosen. And Jessie, I know people are going to want to connect with you. You have a wonderful website. They can just search your name and it'll come up, but you're also on Instagram. You have a Substack, Bravery by Jessie Rosen .substack.com,
yeah.
and you're on TikTok.
Yeah.
And we are just so grateful that you came on the show. We love talking about this book. We love the book. And
Thank you so
we know it's going to do
much.
great. So
I
please come
hope
back for those
so.
future ones.
Oh my
Well,
goodness,
I
I
have
feel like I
two
need to
more
come over
questions.
for a holiday with you two. I feel like it's this family. We
I mean,
haven't
we're
kicked off
big
to do
Italian
this.
families. You'll blend right in.
I know. Oh, it
But
was
I,
such a
I do have two
pleasure.
more questions.
Oh yes, of course.
First, I want to know, well, I want to know if how you did your star twin survey. How did you find people with your birthday?
I mean, the internet is the real answer. I posted on social media and asked for some friends to help and elevate it and move it forward. I did a little boosting of posts for the first time in my life. But I will say one of the other ways was through researching census data. So the Census of the United States of America has data without contact information, of course, of who
Right.
was born when. And then you can search those names in a Google, in a Facebook, in an Instagram, and come up with those names. And then if you're truly crazy, you can cold message those people trying to find them to see if you're star twin. So um, there was a period of my search where things went, I think, a little too far, and I needed to rein it back in. To remember that we're just writing a novel here. We're not actually trying to disprove astrology. But that was my course. I kind of started online and then went through like data that's available and then started contacting people.
That's fascinating, and I love it. I love the craziness. And my last question for you before we let you go, which I really don't want to, I want to just continue talking all
I
afternoon.
know.
But
Thanks.
do you have anything that you're willing to share that is next up on your radar? I know you're so involved in all different forms of media and writing, and we're just curious if you have something kind of in the works.
Yes, I have something percolating. And because it's going to be, I feel like everything I ever write is going to feature the transformation and change of a wonderful, powerful woman. I just think those are the stories that I have a lot of heart for. And of course, I think there's going to be family as a piece of that too. And then travel, right? I keep finding that when I leave is when I become, right? And so those are elements. And this time I'm playing with some source material in a novel way that is very special to me. So that's what I'll say. And it's my goal to have a few chapters of that done because it's a little departure. I would say it's an expansion from these books. I want to play with some chapters and make sure that this is the right direction next. But I'm pretty excited about it. I feel like I know when it's the right project. When I'm driving, I live in Los Angeles, I'm driving a lot. I'm driving and like writing chapters. I'm starting to write chapters in my head, and that's been happening with this potential project.
That's
So
awesome.
we'll see. We hope that that is what comes together, and that I'll get to talk to you about it.
Oh, we
Well, we
can't
hope you
wait.
do.
Yes, absolutely. And in the meanwhile, listeners, you want to pick up this book. It is fantastic. And Jessie, again, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
on the show. We just love talking
Thank
with you.
you. Great questions. Great time.
Absolutely. Take care now.
Well, that was awesome.
What a fantastic interview. My
That
gosh,
was awesome.
because just like the book, it is lively and
Yes.
entertaining. That's exactly how Jessie is. I just appreciated her insight. And I also love that we got a little glimpse behind the scenes of this
Yes.
book, like what went into these characters that she was crafting.
Absolutely. The layers to it multiplied for me because I was like, oh my gosh, like this was written from a perspective of yourself, but really not at all. You know, there was that back and forth, and that added some things that was really cool.
That was awesome. All right. Well, I want to tell our listeners about some other authors that we have coming up throughout the summer. We have an incredible lineup. We have Chanel Cleaton, The Lost Story of Eva Fuentes, and we have Elma Katsu with Fiend. That is a big buzz book. We have Amy Austen, His Last Mistress. We have Christina Baker Klein and Ann Burke coming back for Please Don't Lie. We have Susan Wiggs coming back with Wayward Girls. We have Adam Plantinga with Hardtown. We've got Chris Pavoni coming back with The Doorman. Christina McMorris, she's been on the show, I think, twice already. The Girls of Good Fortune. We have Clemence Michelin with Our Last Resort. We have Adriana Trigiani, also coming back with The View from Lake Como. We have Isabella Maldonado and Jeffrey Deaver, also coming back. They were so much fun with The Grave Artist. This is an all-star lineup. We are so excited. And readers, listeners, we're thankful for you. You're tuning into us through our website, bookstormpodcast.com. And of course, you can find us on Instagram, on X, we're on YouTube, but we're just grateful for you. And we know why you're showing up, because the very best authors are here on Bookstorm Podcast.